Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Flyfishing Oregon's Wild and Scenic Rivers webcast. My name is Allie Fisher, and I'll be your MC for tonight. I'm the Communications and EDI Associate for Oregon Wild, and I'm really honored tonight to introduce our very special guest, Kirk Blaine, an avid fly angler and Southern Oregon Regional Coordinator for the Native Fish Society. He will be discussing some of his favorite wild and scenic fishing spots and the role protected rivers play in maintaining healthy native fish populations. We'll also get a brief update on the progress of Senator Wyden's River Democracy Act from Jamie Dawson, the Oregon Wild Public Lands campaigner. I would also like to include a land acknowledgement in this space. I would like to offer gratitude to the land itself and for those who have lived here in Oregon since time immemorial. Not just the forests, rivers, and mountains and deserts that those of us at Oregon Wild celebrate and work to conserve, but also places of art and industry, science, commerce, and community that are built upon these lands. I would also like to acknowledge the continuing presence of Indigenous peoples on the land today, as well as historical events, including colonial legacies and wrongdoings like forced removal that have long-lasting and current impacts. Additionally, a recording of this program will be emailed out tomorrow and will be posted on our website, OregonWild.org, in the Wild blog. Please enter your questions at any time. Since we do normally get a flood of questions at the end, it's really helpful if you get yours in sooner, so it's easier for us to organize and answer these after our guest has finished presenting. If you got a raffle ticket, thank you. Your support allows us to continue doing these presentations and the work that we do. The raffle will be open through this evening, so if after the presentation you decide you'd like to enter, you can do that by finding this event on the OregonWild.org homepage. Winners will be selected soon and contacted by email to verify shipping addresses. Lastly, keep a lookout for our next webcast on lampreys of Oregon. The sign up is now online at OregonWild.org. Now I'll pass it off to Kirk.
Thank you, Allie, for the awesome introduction here. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen real quick. Awesome. So again, I want to send a special thank you to Allie, Jamie with Oregon Wild in general, and our partners over there for all the work that they do in conservation and being our partners on certain things such as the River Democracy Act and all the work that is going towards that, towards Senator Wyden's awesome legislation to protect our rivers and streams. So thank you, Oregon Wild, for putting this on tonight, and super excited to be here and share about something that's pretty near and dear to my heart, and I'm passionate about both wild native fish as well as rivers. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with a little bit of an intro to what Native Fish Society is and who we are. Native Fish Society was founded in Portland in 1995 by a small group of passionate anglers and advocates. Since then, we've grown into one of the leading grassroots nonprofit native fish conservation organizations in the Pacific Northwest. We work from the Russian River in Northern California, across the states of Washington and Oregon and Western Idaho, and partners in British Columbia. So we extend all the way up into Canada. We serve nearly 4,000 members and supporters, and 80% of our funding comes from individuals. We are a grassroots-led and grassroots-funded organization. As you can see here, our mission is to restore and protect abundant wild runs of native fish and to steward the rivers and watersheds that sustain them all. Our ultimate vision is wild fish for all. Native Fish Society exists to cultivate a groundswell of public support necessary to revive abundant wild fish, free-flowing rivers, and thriving local communities. We look at the entire watershed as an ecosystem as a whole, rather than just the fishery itself, and just focusing on the native fish that that call those waters home. We focus on the communities, the people, and everything that surrounds it. A section of our organization is our River Steward program. It's a network of place-based advocates for wild fish. These are place-based local advocates on each individual watershed throughout the Pacific Northwest that call them their home waters. We have 88 different river stewards located throughout the Pacific Northwest doing this and protecting their home waters on over 4,000 river miles. We have 174,000 square miles of watersheds in 4 different states. Pictured here, you can see our awesome South Umpqua River Steward, Stan Petrowski. Stan's been engaged with us for multiple years now, and he calls the South Umpqua his home. He lives nearby off of Joe Hall Creek. The efforts of our staff and volunteers and members converge in a specific conservation campaigns, which we advance for the conservation of native fish by targeting specific challenges or opportunities and leveraging grassroots organizing and solutions based on science and ecological knowledge. Typically, we focus campaigns on one or more of the root causes of wild fish decline. We often refer to these as the 5 H's. On this slide, you can only see 4, but we focus on 5 H's. The first one being habitat and what they call home. The second being hydropower or barriers, dams to fish. The third being hatcheries. The fourth being harvest, both a little bit commercially and sport harvest within our fisheries. And then lastly, we focus on heat, which isn't pictured here. Heat and climate change are one of the most influential limiting factors to our fisheries today. So it's important that we include this in our package of what we're focusing our conservation campaigns on now and into the future. Another section of our organizational structure is our Native Fish Fellowship Program. Native Fish Fellows are grassroots network of exceptional experts who donate their unique skills and talents to advance our strategic conservation efforts. Today, we have 14 different fellows with diverse backgrounds, including economists, underwater photographers, big data analysis, and other experts that help provide leverage that we can utilize in our campaigns across the Pacific Northwest. These are awesome volunteers that have outstanding expertise in these fields. We hook them up with our local river stewards to really engage in different campaigns. Today, Native Fish Society has 34 active conservation campaigns across the Pacific Northwest. You can see the map here. We have all 34 of these are focusing on different H's throughout the Pacific Northwest, and you can see those indicated by the numbers and where they're at. We have multiple in California. Oregon, where we started, is obviously heavily influenced with campaigns, and then Washington, one up in British Columbia, and all the way over to Idaho. These are all the work that we have going on right now, and they range from all 5 of those H's that we spoke about in the last couple slides. So with that, I want to transition into the reason we're here tonight and fly fishing the wild and scenic rivers of Oregon. I also want to continue to send thanks out to Jamie and Allie to have me here tonight and share something that I'm so passionate about, fly fishing. I want to share a little bit about my background in fly fishing and how I got to where I am today. I started fly fishing at a young age. Shortly after school, I realized it was a real passion. I guided some of the rivers in Colorado, high country, shortly after college, and then moved my way out to the Pacific Northwest to call Oregon home about 4 years ago. What I'm speaking to you about tonight will transition across multiple different watersheds. Unfortunately, we only have an hour here tonight, and my presentation is about 40 minutes long. So I'm only focusing on 3 different watersheds or areas, regions within our state. I'm going to focus on the Sprague, the North Umpqua, and then lastly, the Wild Rivers coast and the streams down in the Southwest Oregon. Again, a lot of the tips and tactics, strategies that I share with you here tonight can be transitioned to other streams throughout our state, throughout the West, and utilized for trout fishing or steelhead fishing, whatever you might be interested in engaging with. The other thing I wanted to bring up about the presentation tonight is the River Democracy Act focuses I want to first of all send thanks to Wyden and Merkley for introducing that, but included in the River Democracy Act legislation is a lot of protections for small tributaries and streams that provide essential water to these bigger watersheds that we fish and that we call our home waters. Without protecting and providing conservation measures for these real small streams, we wouldn't have the water quality quantity for our communities further downstream, and we wouldn't have the fisheries further downstream. So it's critical that we protect these watersheds long into the future for future generations to utilize and enjoy, because these fish use those smaller tributaries. Yeah, we might not be able to fish them, but they use them for spawning, rearing, and the cold water that they provide to our major river systems. So with that, I'm going to continue into my presentation. This here is a photo of me fly fishing and swinging flies on the North Umpqua for winter steelhead. The North Umpqua was designated wild and scenic in 1988, and that's for 4 miles downstream from Soda Springs Dam. Beautiful section of river if you haven't been to it yet. I'm going to jump into that a little further in my presentation here. So like I said before, I wanted to start my presentation in the Sprague River in the Upper Klamath Basin. It's a very diverse river with multiple different species calling it home. Provides adequate clean water for these species, the entomology, the entire ecosystem that's up there. The photos here you can see are of the Sprague up in the upper left-hand corner, an alluvial red band rainbow, and a bull trout, which all call it home. The Sprague has 3 species of lamprey, one of which is undescribed, and the others are only found in the Klamath system. 2 species of sculpin are only found in the Klamath Basin, and they call the Sprague home. And 3 species of suckers that call the Sprague home, 2 of only which are in the Upper Klamath Basin. And a high concentration of inland red band trout. Recently, there has been genetic analysis that suggests the migratory red bands that spawn in the Sprague River, also the Wood and Williamson River, are a distinct ancient race of trout only found in the Upper Klamath River Basin. These fish are very unique and deserve quite the protections that we need to provide for them, and the River Democracy Act will help with that. I want to thank Jordan Ortega for these pictures. Jordan is a PhD student with OSU Fisheries that is studying these fish in the Klamath Basin and the Sprague itself and doing a lot of work up there. The other fish that I want to point out that's not native, you can see it at the bottom of the list here, is brook trout. They're invasive to the watershed and actually are part of a limiting factor to the native red bands, the lamprey, and other species that call it home. So whenever we're out there fishing for these brook trout, they're actually really thriving in the watershed. So don't be bashful about taking a few home for dinner or enjoying those at home. So including the River Democracy Act is the South Fork of the Sprague River. Like I said earlier, they have native bull trout located in the system. It is a spring driven throughout the summer, so it loses all its snow melt. It starts on the headwaters. The headwaters of the South Fork of the Sprague are Deer Heart Mountain, which does get quite a bit of snowpack. But once that snowpack dwindles, it transitions to a fully spring-driven watershed, and that water stays extremely cool. That's beneficial to those those native trout species that call it home and other species that call it home long into the late summer months, especially in years like we're seeing here today. The North Fork of the Sprague River, it travels through a beautiful canyon. Again, its headwaters are on Gearhart Mountain, and it's spring fed through the late summer months. Here's a couple beautiful pictures that Jordan provided me as well of that watershed and fishing out on it. Here's a picture of the main stem of the Sprague. Again, these aren't included in the River Democracy Act, but it's going to see huge benefits from the protections that the River Democracy Act provides to it. Both the South Fork and the North Fork of the Sprague are included in the River Democracy Act, which we will get into here in a little bit. I wanted to cover a little bit about the entomology. So the entomology is the bugs that call, bugs or the food and whatnot that calls it home. So I wanted to, the Sprague River is famous for a hexagenia hatch, which is a large looking mayfly. You can see it on the right picture there. See how big it is compared to Jordan's fingers there. Quite big. It's very unique. In some watersheds, they don't have a hex hatch. They also have abundant leeches, which the fish thrive off of. They have black drakes, caddis, and other mayflies, and dragonfly larvae, which are beneficial to the ecosystem. I want to share a little bit about the gear that might be useful when fly fishing the North Fork or South Fork Sprague and the main stem of the Sprague River. For me, again, these are all recommendations from what I know and what I like to do. This can easily be transformed for anyone's liking. Some folks might like something a little bit different, but for me, I really enjoy a 9-foot 4-weight rod. It's ideal for a smaller watershed. You still have enough power to fight bigger fish, yet it's fun to catch those bigger fish and you can get the line out there. For the main stem of the Sprague River, I would suggest a 5-weight, a little bit heavier, a little bit more backbone for those fish. As for flies, I would focus directly, especially after the summer months, I would focus into the terrestrials. So hoppers, grasshoppers, ants, and beetles. Other months of the year, and including in the summertime, mayflies would work really well. Caddis would work very well. Usually on many of the streams, focus on a caddis hatch around Mother's Day. So this would work well as well. Small nymphs, including a pheasant tail, which imitates a mayfly, and small woolly boogers or wet flies that are very tiny. They imitate a leech, and those would work really well. Soft stripping, similar to what a leech would look like floating down through the river. So the top left picture is a picture of kind of the gear that I take out. I'm going to share in the next slide about what that is and where it goes. And the top right picture is a picture of the nymphs that I would utilize in the Sprague River. You can see the pheasant tail on the bottom right, a couple other different patterns, some small stone flies, that sort of thing. And then the terrestrial box straight ahead, ants, beetles, large chubby Chernobyls, and grasshopper looking patterns. Stimulators would work very well too. Not pictured here are caddis or some parachute Adams or Adams flies that might work really well as well. So for a setup, and when I say setup, I mean like my line and how I'm going to rig my rod to go out there and fish the Sprague River. I would use a 4-weight rod, like I said earlier, and I would use a 4-weight line that's rated for that. Attach that line to your backing, which is on your reel. Any fly shop can help you rig that up. I would use it a 7.5-foot tapered mono leader. The reason I would use a 7.5 foot rather than a 9 foot would be the size of the stream is a little bit smaller than what I would need for a 9-foot tapered leader. So if it were necessary, I could add some tippet onto the end of that, make my presentation a little longer. The only reason I would be doing that is if the trout are spooky. I notice I'm spooking quite a few fish. I also take tippet. You can see the tippet spool that's out there. I take multiple different types of tippet just in case. Some of them are fluorocarbon, some are monofilament. But really, if you limit yourself to 4X and 5X tippet on the Sprague River, you'll be totally fine. Spools of mono. You'll be able to throw both dry flies and underneath the surface with some nymphs, and you should be able to handle those fish just right. I would start off by fishing a dry fly on the surface and fish the small pockets of holding water, 1 to 3 feet deep. Fish will hold in faster water during hot water temps. So really focus on the faster water when the water temps are up, and try small seams and edges of the riffles, and look under grassy banks for larger fish during hopper season. That's a good thing. One thing to keep in mind, and I'll continue to share about this throughout my presentation, is it's important to carry a thermometer with you when you're out there in the field. As soon as water temperatures reach 68 degrees, it's very stressful for those fish. So it's best to call it quits when those water temps get above 68. Even when they're at 68, 67, anything over 65, it's super stressful for both trout and steelhead. So it's most likely decision to make it, hang it up, maybe go swimming, snorkeling, look at those fish and observe them from a distance rather than actually catching them. I wanted to share some of the threats to the Sprague watershed. So overgrazing within the upper watershed has been an issue. Irrigation further down, and then invasive species or those brook trout. These pictures here, you can see the North Fork of the Sprague and a lovely couple enjoying the day out fishing. These are courtesy of Marshall Mosier, our river steward over in the Klamath Basin. So the protections under the River Democracy Act, the South Fork of the Sprague will see 25.6 miles proposed for wild and scenic, has been proposed for wild and scenic designation. The North Fork of the Sprague has seen 9.1 miles proposed for wild and scenic. The land managers will create a comprehensive river management plan for the proposed area. It will not affect private property further down. This is only for federal lands, and it will benefit the water quality and the ecosystem further downstream on the main stem of the Sprague River in private land access. So beautiful river. If you've never been over to Central Oregon, South Central Oregon, east of the Cascades, check it out. Beautiful watershed. There's also the Williamson and the Sican rivers over there as well that also fish well. So it's a great little destination area where you can hit a couple different streams and catch quite a few different trout. One thing I would mention, this area did see anadromous fish back in the day. However, with the building of the dams, the 4 lower Klamath River dams, volitional fish passage was blocked. So we are looking at getting those dams removed in 2023, which quite possibly could bring back steelhead and both spring Chinook to this basin, which would be very exciting and is a wonderful opportunity for this watershed. The next section of my presentation, I wanted to discuss and share with you all about fishing on the Wild Rivers coast. So the Wild Rivers coast is the section of southwestern Oregon on the coast that beautiful area. It goes from around Port Orford area all the way down to the California border. Multiple different watersheds dumping into the ocean there, as well as the lower Rogue entering the Pacific Ocean. The lower Rogue has many tributaries as well that are highly beneficial, including the Illinois, which great little spot to fish as well, which I won't cover too much of in this presentation. So the rivers of the Wild River coast are the Elk, the lower Rogue River, Hunter Creek, Pistol River, Chetco, Winchuck, and Euchre Creek. These rivers are fairly unique. They are unique. They have no dams except for the Rogue River, which its dam is up high. It's at Lost Creek Reservoir. And it's a stronghold for wild salmonids. So all these waters are highly beneficial. This picture here is of the Elk River over just outside of Port Orford. Hunter Creek is part of the Wild Rivers coast, and this is a beautiful picture of a wild winter steelhead, and some folks fishing Hunter Creek. Photos by Ken Morrish. Pistol River, it's another area of the Wild Rivers coast. Beautiful, beautiful photo here. Again, Ken Morrish with the credit of Flywater Travel. The native fish of the Wild Rivers coast. So like I said earlier, it's a wild fish stronghold with minimum hatchery influence. It hosts a population of fall Chinook salmon, winter steelhead, threatened coho salmon, sea-run cutthroat trout, resident rainbow trout, and Pacific lamprey. These photos here, juvenile Chinook salmon, a juvenile steelhead in the top right corner, an adult steelhead there in the bottom left, and then some adult Chinook salmon there in the bottom. Again, these have fall Chinook, not spring Chinook. The Rogue River does have spring Chinook. So the lower Rogue, it does fish early in the spring. Those are spring Chinook. Here's some photos of some beautiful coastal cutthroat trout. They do host great populations of coastal cutthroat trout and cutthroat trout fishing throughout the year. However, during this presentation for the Wild Rivers coast, I'm going to focus mainly on winter steelhead. But I did want to share with you that they do have some great population of coastal cutthroat trout. And then again, a picture of a coastal lamprey down there. I'm going to jump straight into the gear for winter steelhead fishing down there on the coast. I would recommend a 13-foot 7-weight Spey Rod and Spey fishing down there. You could also use a 10-foot 8-weight single-handed rod. For the Spey Rod, I would recommend a Skagit line. It's a heavier set line, a little bit thicker, catches, you use the water tension to throw your loops and cast the fly out rather than throwing the traditional cast that we've all seen on a river runs through it. But it's a beautiful cast, easy way to fish. Some of those smaller rivers in the Wild Rivers coast, definitely easily fishable with a single-handed rod. I would recommend a long belly taper line for that. The reason being is it's easy to roll cast and get that line out there. A roll cast allows you to cast with a single hand without having a back cast if you have bushes or whatnot behind you. When fishing for winter steelhead in this area, I would recommend you use tips to provide sink to the fly when necessary. For a Spey Rod, I would recommend a 10-foot T11 tip for that, and then tie your short leader onto that. I'll cover the setup here in just a minute. But in this photo here, you can see a winter steelhead fly. This is an intruder style pattern or an articulated style pattern, a Skagit line, and then two different Spey setups there that are ideal for fishing this area. Couple boxes of flies. Fairly simple to get out on the water. You will need waders for fishing for winter steelhead, as opposed to the Sprague. I would highly recommend just wet wading on the Sprague. But for the Wild Rivers coast, you would need waders and boots. And as we all know, the coast rains a lot, so probably a rain jacket. Some flies that I would recommend for seagoing trout or anadromous trout or anadromous fish. General Practitioner is a large traditional style fly that works really well. Large hair wings. Winter fish typically like bigger flies. They want something else to really instigate it. Intruders, hobo spays. First, Chinook. I put clouser in there, and there's a picture of a clouser there on the far right. They like clousers, and Chinook are very difficult fish to catch. Once you get a little bit experienced with winter steelhead, I highly recommend getting out there and trying to catch a fall Chinook. It's a great experience to get hooked up with one, and they're awesome fish. So get out there and try it out. The picture on the left is a hobo spey, and it's a wonderful fly to utilize on the Wild Rivers coast. As for your setup, like I said, a 12-foot 7-weight rod is what I use. It's a 12/6 7-weight rod. I use a 550 grain Skagit head. I use 12 feet of T11 sink tip. And to that, so I take the Skagit line and I attach that 12 feet of T11 to that. And then to the end of that, I attach a 2-foot leader and of 20-pound tippet, and then a 1-foot leader of 15-pound tippet. And then to that, I tie my fly on. This gives a great presentation to those fish, and it instigates, hopefully, a bite. So when fly fishing for winter steelhead, I recommend using, like I said, large wet flies, some of those flies that I mentioned earlier. Use weighted flies in areas to get to the bottom. So if you're fishing in a little bit deeper area, definitely use a little bit of weight on that fly, including your weighted T11 sink tip. If you notice you're hitting bottom, lighten your fly, lighten your tip, make it a little bit easier so you're not hitting the bottom. Fish down and across to entice the fish. So it's your cast is standing from the bank and down and across at a 45-degree angle, and it's called swinging flies. It's a traditional method that's utilized. It's a lot of fun. It's definitely worth the commitment to try to catch a fish like that. Once you do, it really sticks in and kind of gets you stuck with fly fishing. And find some nice holding water that is about walking pace. So if you're slowly walking in the wintertime, that's the water you want to fish if you can walk right next to the moving water. During the summertime, I'll speak about summer fishing here in a minute, but you want to find a little bit faster water. But those fish are going to be in a little bit slower walking pace. And as a last resort, you could use an indicator with large nymphs. It works actually extremely well, but I recommend trying to swing flies first. But it is a way that you can catch fish, and you can fish regular trouty looking water, seams, edges of holding water for that. Fish will hold in front of rocks, behind rocks, and that sort of thing. Again, fly fishing for king salmon is a possibility, but very difficult. And that's in the fall. Yeah. Pictured here is a beautiful fish caught on the Wild River coast by Ken Morrish. It's a beautiful wild winter steelhead, fly water travel. I wanted to share some of the threats to the Wild River coast. So mining is one of the biggest threats that they're seeing down there. Currently, there's a 20-year mineral withdrawal on the area, but that's not permanent. We're probably in year 4 of that. So there's been legislation introduced to make that permitted as well. Another threat is logging. Many of the watersheds, when I go down there, private land has been logged, and it's only a matter of time that the public land might be logged. So River Democracy Act will provide buffers on that. Some grazing up there, but there's no dams. Like I said, Upper Rogue has Lost Creek Reservoir. Protections under the River Democracy Act. So for Pistol River, 32.1 miles is being proposed. For Hunter Creek, 14.5 miles is being proposed under the legislation. For the Winchuck, 29 miles has been proposed. And then there's multiple tributaries to the Lower Rogue that have been included, including Shasta Costa Creek, Quasatna, and a couple others, as well as the tributaries to the Illinois. The Illinois is already wild and scenic, and so is parts of the Lower Rogue, but other tributaries to those rivers that are essential for our wild native fish, as well as the ecosystem around, are also included in the legislation for the River Democracy Act. Again, it'll provide 1-mile buffers for all streams that are included in the legislation. That's a half mile on either side of the river. It will require land managers to develop that management plan, or the comprehensive river management plan that I spoke about in regards to Sprague River. And it will include provisions for fire, and it does not affect private lands. That's one thing to keep in mind. So after that, I wanted to transition to something that's even closer and near and dear and passionate to my heart, and that's the Northumbria Watershed. I moved here a little over 4 years ago to the town of Roseburg, and I call the Northumbria my home water. So it's a beautiful area. Spent countless of hours out there swinging flies for wild steelhead. With this section of the presentation, I'm going to cover both the trout fishing as well as the steelhead fishing on the Northumbria River. It's just a gorgeous, abundant runs of fish. We could always work on getting more, but yeah, it's a wonderful fishery, and it's something that I love so much. So some of the native fish of the Umpqua watershed include summer steelhead. It is one of 3 rivers on the coast of Oregon that has a run of summer steelhead, and it has one of the best runs of summer steelhead. The winter steelhead of the North Umpqua, it has quite a few too. Spring Chinook salmon call it home, threatened coho salmon. Some fall Chinook make it up. I don't have it on the list here, but there are a few that barely make it over Winchester Dam, but they don't go further up into the system. Sea run cutthroat trout, resident rainbow trout, Pacific lamprey, and brown trout are located in the system, but they're non-native. So if you are fishing for those and you catch a few, don't be bashful. Again, take those home and enjoy them. These pictures here are a winter, they're all 3 winter steelhead of the North Umpqua River. 2 of them were caught up in the fly only section. One of them a little bit further down on the main stem of the North Umpqua River. I'm going to start off by fly fishing for trout in the North Umpqua and the main stem below Soda Springs Dam. So similar to the Sprague River, I would recommend a 9-foot 5-weight rod. Weighted flies are illegal July 1 through October 1st. These are all regulations that are put aside for conservation measures for summer steelhead. Summer steelhead are a state sensitive species, so something to keep in mind. I really recommend everyone checks the regulations on the North Umpqua before they go out. I'm sharing the typical things that I know, but I just wanted to share. No indicators or bobbers allowed while fishing. So nymph fishing is not possible throughout the year. So summer or winter, a single barbless hook is only allowed. So no 2 flies or two hooks on the same fly. Some traditional Atlantic salmon flies have 2 hooks, but that's not allowed on the North Umpqua. Euro nymphing is possible, and salmon flies are huge for trout fishing on the North Umpqua in the months of May. It's an awesome fishery, and I would recommend waders for getting out there for trout fishing on the main stem Encore River. I would use, like I said, a typical rig that I used on the Sprague, the main stem Sprague. And we also have multiple different types of mayflies, caddis flies coming off as well. But again, that hatch that's awesome is the salmon fly hatch. Pictured here are a couple different photos of trout on the North Umpqua. One angler down in the fly only section fishing for trout, and then the other one is a fish that I caught. I was spey fishing at this instance for summer steelhead. However, I landed this beautiful big cutthroat trout, which would have been easily caught on a salmon fly pattern with a single-handed rod had I been using that. So just an awesome fish there that lives there in the North Umpqua River. So I wanted to share a little bit about fly fishing above Soda Springs Dam, and this section is being proposed in the River Democracy Act as well. It's dry fly fishing. You could also use a dry dropper. There's lots of brown trout in this section, cutthroat trout as well, some rainbows. But the section is you can fish Lamolo Reservoir to Lamolo Falls, which has smaller fish, but quite a few fish. And then you can also fish from Lamolo Falls to Tokenie Lake. Lamolo Falls is a buried anadromy. It's huge, so that's why I kind of separated those 2 out. This photo here is a photo of a brown trout that was caught in that section below Lamolo Reservoir, and the second one is a photo of a nice holding pool, which I caught a couple rainbows out of below Lamolo. I wanted to jump in and share about steelhead fishing on the North Umpqua. So gear for summer steelhead fishing, I use a 10-foot, you could use a 10-foot 7-weight single-handed rod. I prefer an 11-foot 7-weight switch rod. That's just my preference. Any Spey outfit or single-handed outfit that you really like would work well. I would recommend something in the 7-weight or bigger. These fish are big, and it would stress them out to catch them on anything smaller. So that's what I would recommend. On my 11-foot 7-weight rod, I use a 25 grain line. It's a thinner line than that Skagit line that I recommended. For the single-handed long line, I recommend a long belly for a large roll cast and ideal for long loops. I recommend traditional wet flies and skating flies. The North Umpqua is known for skating dry flies across the water and enticing those summer steelhead to come up and attack your fly. They'll explode out of the water to hit it. The picture in the top left there is a picture of a summer steelhead. They get quite big in the North Umpqua. The picture on the right is some traditional flies, wet flies. And then the picture in the bottom there is some skater flies that can be utilized for fishing the North Umpqua. Gear for winter steelhead fishing, I would recommend a 13-foot 8-weight. Skagit lines, like I shared with on the Wild Rivers coast. Those, like I said, again, are thicker than the Scandi lines. Multiple different tips for the North Umpqua. So I recommended a T11 for the Wild Rivers coast. The 12-foot T11 will work on the North Umpqua, but I would also recommend having another one that's a little bit deeper, a T14 for deep water situations. The river is so unique, has long, deep pools that would require you to get a little bit deeper. The structure down bottom is so unique that it's hard to get a fly down there at certain times. So really recommend having multiple different tips with you. I recommend large traditional flies and large intruder style flies. Again, I was speaking about some of the regulations a little bit earlier in terms of conservation measures that are already put in place, but it's fly only water. The 34 miles below Soda Springs Dam that are wild and scenic is designated for fly only. You can still use a spinning rod with a bubble with water and flies below it, but it's recommended for fly fishing only. And it's generally speaking, you're swinging flies up there. You're not dead drifting them or Euro nymphing them. You're throwing the flies down and across, and you're focusing on holding water in which they come up. Baker Wayside, it burned down quite heavily last year during the Archie Creek fire, but the sign's still there, and it shows a lot of the good holding pools that would be ideal to fish. They consider the camp water to be everything from around Mott Bridge down to just around the corner past the Steamboat Inn. And it has over close to 22 different places to fish throughout that 2 miles or whatever section of their water. It's a great place to just get out there, hike around, and learn about that. Again, like I was saying in the previous presentation, for focus when the water is warm and fast. Warm water means focus on fast water. When the water is cold, focus on slow water. Those fish are going to hold in those two areas. Wrong way here. Here's some pictures of some beautiful one, that summer steelhead that was caught on the North Umpqua a couple of years ago. Just gorgeous fish, beautiful hen. Some of the threats to the North Umpqua watershed is warming water temperatures, logging, gravel recruitment, non-native species, as well as dams. So these are all things that are contributing to decreased populations of salmonids and harmful effects to the fish. So under the River Democracy Act, there's going to be some awesome things that are going to contribute to the basin. Again, the North Umpqua watershed is already designated wild and scenic, but there's multiple different tributaries to that basin that are being proposed under the River Democracy Act. And although you can't fish those tributaries, it's critical that we protect these long into the future. So the North Umpqua Basin and Steamboat Creek watershed, There's been 93 miles proposed up there. Some of it was included in the Frank and Jeannie Moore Wild Steelhead Sanctuary legislation that passed, I think it's 2 years ago now. Other North Umpqua tributaries further up and surrounding that, there's 111 miles that are being proposed in the River Democracy Act. This protects critical spawning and rearing habitat for both wild salmonids and resident trout. So critical that it be included there. And it protects riparian areas, which are ideal for cold water long into the future. As you can see here, these two pictures are post Archie Creek fire last year. It devastated the lower end of the watershed. And it's going to be a long recovery to get back there. Some of the logging that I was talking about previously and the threats, it is being considered salvage logging. And these trees are critical for fish habitat as well as long-term structure within the watershed. So just something to keep in mind as well. Wanted to finish with just a beautiful picture of the lower end of North Umpqua off of Soda Springs Dam. It's such a gorgeous river. This was prior to the Archie Creek fire. So the watershed has changed dramatically, and this picture would be drastically different since Archie Creek fire. I wanted to leave everyone tonight with a couple different resources that are ideal for fly fishing throughout Oregon and fly fishing in general. Again, some of the tactics that I shared about trout fishing can easily be utilized in other watersheds in the western states and even back east. But some of the resources that I would recommend is the Fly Fisher's Guide to Oregon by John Huber. It has not every single, but a lot of the watersheds in our state that you can fish, outlined when there might be hatches, how to fish them, that sort of thing. So it's a great resource. You can pick it up at a local fly shop or on Amazon. The other resource for steelhead fishing, I would recommend Steelhead Fly Fishing and Flies by Trey Combs. It was a great read, great intel on steelhead waters throughout the entire Pacific Northwest, not just Oregon. And then lastly, I'd recommend you just go and create a relationship with your local fly shop. Those folks know your waters extremely well, and they'll be able to point you in the right direction, help you with flies. Any beginners that are on this presentation today, I strongly recommend you try it out. It's not hard to get into. Folks at the local fly shops would gladly help you out, get you set up, get you rolling. Again, you don't need a whole lot, a 4-weight rod, an easy dry line, some leaders and some small flies, and just use your shoes and wet weight for a while until you get comfortable doing it. But it's an awesome activity. I'm super passionate about it, and I really enjoyed sharing about it with you today. So that wraps up my presentation, and I want to thank you all for joining me. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Oregon Wild or myself. I can share in the follow-up email contact information for me, but do not hesitate to reach out to me. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Jamie, to share about the River Democracy Act. I'm excited.
I'm going to take two minutes or less. That's my pitch. And if you have questions for Kirk, put them in the chat or the Q&A bubble in Zoom now, because we're going to go ahead and get to those really soon. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead. Maybe you can stop screen sharing, Kirk, and I can start really briefly. I've got like 5 slides or less here because I want to get to questions. Thanks for that presentation. I was taking notes, and I'm so glad this is recorded because I'm going to need to come back and reference it. So River Democracy Act, my maybe 60-second pitch to you. I think that Kirk already did an amazing job outlining, what the bill is and the kind of influence it can have, especially within the region that he's super familiar with. This bill is the most important river protection bill that Oregon has seen in a generation or more. It's amazing. So we're talking about nearly 4,700 miles of rivers and streams and a couple lakes spread out all across the state. And this bill was compiled after a 2+ year public process where Senator Wyden was out and about, having town halls, meeting with folks, and taking submissions in person, online, and in snail mail. He got over 15,000 nominations for segments of rivers and streams to include in this bill. I think if I'm going to make one pitch to you, or maybe two pitches, big or small, we need them all. Kirk was really hammering this point home, and I just want to say it one more time. Like, these smaller streams, creeks, tributaries are so important. Like, if we want commercial fishery, if we want to have, you know, fish generally at all in any of our larger river systems, we need these smaller tributaries, creeks and streams to be there to provide cold water and all of this super important habitat for these fish to spawn and rear. And all along the, you know, stream banks is also an incredibly important spot for big game, birds. I mean, it's something like 80% of wildlife utilize these riparian corridors and are directly connected to them for their well-being. Big thing just happened with this bill. It just had its first hearing in the Senate. So it was introduced in February. We kind of waited, and then it just had its first hearing, which is a sign that the bill is moving. You know, the train is leaving the station and it's moving in the general direction of the president's desk. It has to make a few stops along the way, but this is really exciting that it's happening. And so my pitch to you regarding this is that right now there is a public comment period that's open. So you can actually submit a comment to the Senate committee on Energy and Natural Resources that's considering this bill right now, and send them a brief note online saying, I support more wild and scenic river protections in Oregon. And you can expand on that, or you can keep it short and simple. I actually have a link that we're going to drop in the chat here. It's a spot that you can go in and just, oh yeah, Allie put it in there for me. Thank you. So you can go ahead and go in right after this presentation and send a note to them right now, letting them know that you support efforts to protect more of Oregon's waterways. So with that, let's go ahead and head to Q&A. There's a lot here, so we're gonna get as much as we can in the next 10, 12 minutes. So thanks again, Kirk, and thanks to all of you for being here, and let's go ahead and get to it.
All right, let's get started because there's a lot of questions. So the first one is there a best time of year to fish the forks of the Sprague?
Generally, I would recommend a little bit later in summer, like July. This summer, it's going to be a little bit low flows, high water temps. So right now might be a little bit better, but I really enjoy the hopper hatch or grasshoppers, terrestrials. You can use bigger flies. It's exciting to see those fish really come out of the water and hammer them. And it's a lot of dry fly action. So both whenever the water temperatures get just right and you see those hoppers crawling around on the banks, great time. Those fish are going to be opportunistic, looking up and excited to eat. So that's a fun way to get out there, and it's a fun way to start fly fishing too, because you can use those larger flies. You're not using a smaller style of fly.
Great, thanks. And then Jamie, this one's probably for you. Will the River Democracy Act protect watersheds from the damage from livestock grazing and logging sites?
That's a great question. And Kirk kind of touched on that already. Given the amount of time we have, I'm going to give you a short answer, which is basically that it depends. The Wild and Scenic Rivers Act does not explicitly prohibit livestock grazing or logging, commercial logging. So what it does mean is that there is going to be, you know, when a river or a stream gets designated, it gets its own management plan, and it, as part of that, it has a specific kind of list of values that it is protected for. And so the agency, the managing agency like the Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management, as they're going about their daily business doing management activities, they have to be very careful to not cause harm to the values that that river or stream is protected for. And so the short answer is not explicitly. This does give the agency an opportunity to kind of review everything that's happening on that landscape and make sure that what's happening there is compatible with the, you know, the special values that that river is protected for. I think in a lot of places, at least in Central Oregon, we see a lot of people who aren't necessarily obeying, like when you put the cows on, when you take the cows off. So at the very minimum, I would think that it would greatly increase just the regular impact on the landscape by giving the agency an extra kick in the butt to be paying attention to the things that it should already be doing, or working with the community members who are using that landscape. But it doesn't explicitly prohibit it. So it's sort of a no and. If there's a specific landscape or river that you see that impact happening on a lot, I would encourage you to get engaged in the kind of public process when that river management plan, knock on wood, that this bill passes. I would encourage members of the public to get engaged with agencies when they're writing those river management plans, to make sure that they know how you feel about it.
Great, thanks, Jamie. Moving on to the next question. So this is for you, Kirk. Could you discuss how non-native invasive fish predate our native species, and what can we do to help?
Yeah, so one major way is they eat juveniles on their way out, so they're very aggressive. It looks like in the question box, bass and German brown were in there. They're both very aggressive species, so when those juveniles are out there as fry, they'll feed on them quite heavily. They also take up ecological space for our native species as well. So the best thing that we can do is, when you're out there having fun, enjoying fishing, to take them home for dinner, eat them, share them with your family, and share the bounty. So that's something that you can do. And not only is it fun, but it provides a good meal. Recently, I was out on the main stem of the Umpqua River, which further down, and I caught quite a few smallmouth bass, brought them home, and had fish tacos. So it was a wonderful meal. But anything that you like, but it's best if you do remove the species and allow those native fish to thrive.
Yeah, that sounds delicious. Do you recommend anywhere in the Portland area to fish?
Yeah, so I would recommend, obviously the Deschutes is a little ways from there, but it's a great trout fishery for folks that are just learning how to fish. The Malala River as well is further up. It's on the other side of the Cascades, so I would recommend going up there, checking out some of the trout fishing up there. Again, trout fishing is a little bit easier than steelhead fishing. Steelhead fishing is, some folks like to say, a fish of 1,000 casts. So I did want to share a little bit about it with folks tonight, but I would recommend both the Deschutes and the Malala. Again, I would recommend checking in with a fly shop there in Portland about how to get engaged, how to get out there, what to use. They'll probably pick out a few flies for you to take out into the field, and get you all set up to get out there.
Great. And then, is there a good campsite for accessing the upper Sprague tribs?
To be honest with you, I haven't camped over there. I stayed with one of our river stewards. So when I went over and fished over there, I stayed with them. But there are multiple areas to camp over there by Gearhart Mountain, I believe. So check out both maps over there, as well as I noticed one of the questions for a first time trip over to Sprague, what fly shop would I recommend? Maybe call that fly shop in Klamath Falls. I don't know the specific name of that fly shop, but there's, I think, 2 of them over there. So if you give them a shout, ask them what might be most beneficial. They're usually very welcoming and willing to help share some information.
All right, I think I have time to squeeze in like a few more questions. Let's see. Do you have any experience with Tenkara Fly Fishing? Any thoughts on this style of fishing in Oregon?
I have very little experience, but it seems awesome. I've read an entire book on it. Really for some of these smaller streams like the North Fork, South Fork, Sprague, as well as those the upper North Umpqua, I highly recommend trying it. Some of the fish that I've caught up there with my little 4-weight rod, I would have easily been able to Tenkara with, and it would have been a lot of fun. Super simple fishing. If anyone doesn't know what Tenkara is, you should check it out. Basically, you have like a 10-foot line and a small little 7-foot rod and 1 fly, and super simple. Get out there, and it's all about just being out there and having a good time. So check it out if folks were interested in that. Looks like there's some stuff coming in the chat box as well.
All right, we've got pretty much no more minutes, so I have like one more question for you. And then, yeah, please, if you have more questions, feel free to email Kirk, like you said, because we're not going to be able to get through them all. So what is a lamprey? A sport fish, something to target, or just endangered? Should we avoid?
Right now, I believe they're on the state sensitive species list. I don't know for sure, but they're not targeted. It's a, I can't remember the scientific definition of a lamprey, but we did just do a presentation with KS Wild with a lamprey expert, so you should check that out. I showed a couple pictures in my presentation. It almost looks like a snake, and they actually suck onto the watershed and onto things and kind of hold on and make their way up. They are anadromous, so some of them will go to sea, some of them won't. Obviously, the ones in the upper Klamath Basin can't make it and can't make it back. But they're really cool fish, highly forgotten about. Native Americans used to live and persist off of them, so it's such a cool fish to learn more about. And the fella that did the presentation with KS Wild was actually a lamprey expert. He's got his master's in that, and he shared so much about how the Yurok tribe used to use them traditionally, and how he studies now in modern science.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think that's all we have time for as far as questions goes. But yeah, if you're interested in lamprey, please check out the resource that Kirk said. And also Oregon Wild does have a webcast on them July 27th, and the sign up is on the website. So make sure to check that out. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And again, check out the link to speak up for the River Democracy Act and provide testimony.
Great. Have a good night, everyone. Thanks for attending.
See ya.